You are listening to the Smart Betting Club podcast with me, your host, Peter Ling. Now, this podcast is sponsored by the Matchbook Betting Exchange, and you can find out more on what they offer smart bettors over at matchbook.com. And if you are interested in learning more what it takes to make a profit betting, please do check out my service for winning bettors over at smartbettingclub.com. Hello and welcome to the Smart Betting Club podcast. Joining me today, I have Jeev Jeyaratnam. Jeev is the Chief Betting Officer at Abelson Sport, where he spent nearly 20 years leading the way in player market pricing, including their industry standard goal scorer pricing and settlement feed. Jeev, welcome to the podcast. Do you want to kick things off with a bit of an introduction to yourself?
Yeah, hi Pete, and thanks very much for having me. As you referenced, I am the Chief Betting Officer, which is a title assumed in January from a rebrand we did. But yes, I look after the betting arm of Abelson Sports, which is a business that originally dealt in data, but added a betting element, which we probably will touch later in the pod. But yeah, we are betting focused from this end, so should suit the listeners.
We'll get into more detail as we get into the conversation, but a general overview of what you actually do when it comes to betting at Abelson.
So I run the odds division, which essentially is around 65% of the business revenues these days, so grown significantly. And my role is to manage the team for our goal scorer and player card pricing compilation, look after the in-play team and oversee the stats products, so the stats market, shots on targets, tackles, etc., that we offer, and that's in conjunction with 21st Group, another data analytics firm that we partner with. Plus, I do media like this. I do writing, do travels to conferences, sales, business development, new ideas, everything right down to helping with the rebrand, the beauty of a fairly small company.
Yeah, you wear many different hats. And as I understand it, you've worked at Abelson since, is it straight from university? You've been there 20 years now?
It's not quite true. So I have been in the same role for 20 years, but there was an acquisition in 2017. So originally, and I'm sure many of your listeners will remember Super Soccer from the old days of independent bookmakers and coupons. So
yes,
Super Soccer was based in Birmingham. And after uni, I didn't really know what to do. So I was working part-time in my local William Hill shop in Bromsgrove, Worcestershire, and flicking through the Racing Post and saw an advert for a junior odds compiler in Birmingham. So thought, right, this is what I want to do. I love all this kind of stuff. So I applied for that, did a bit of research prior to that, so worked out what the overrounds they're offering on the coupons, this kind of stuff. Anyway, this seemed to impress the owner, Tony Walpole, and I got offered the job. So that was fantastic. So I started working in with Sherlock Street, it was, so Digbeth area almost of Birmingham, and worked in the office there, the hedging office there, taking bets from other bookmakers who wanted to pass their liability and warm bets on. And we also offered the pricing service for the coupons. So I learned to compile tissues for the coupons, and he was very much involved with that, proof checking those as well. The other part of the business was called Super Soccer Odds Feed, and Super Soccer Odds Feed worked with bookmakers to provide them information. So goal scorers were part of that. We were the very, very early adopters of goal scorers. For example, the Tote, when they had all their shops, we would do their regional coupon, and the Tote regional coupon was like a layout that sat behind the manager's till of scorecasts for all of the teams local to that area. So you might have had a Merseyside and you'd have Liverpool, Everton, but you'd also have Tranmere in there. And then we'd compile all the goal scorers for all of those different matches. And they'd have the options to sort of quote prices off the chart if people came in and wanted to have a localised bet. Anyway, we did this, and the guy who sort of ran that, Martin Wilson, ended up sort of being taken to Ireland to work for Boyle Sports, yeah. And I got passed the reins of that job, Super Soccer Odds Feed. So I sort of took that business on and realised actually the thing that people really wanted from us was the goal scorer pricing. That's what all of the bookmakers wanted. They didn't want everything else. So focused very much on goal scorers, streamlined everything else out, and joined forces with Abelson in around 2013 to do a joint venture. So we supplied the pricing, they supplied the settlement of the feed. And then we created an actual data feed product. So it was all previously Excel sheets, and started marketing that to bookmakers. That was 2013. By 2017, I was thinking we would be better if Abelson sort of bought us and we sort of collaborated into one. I did have some equity as well in Super Soccer Odds Feed by this time. Worked out quite well. So 2017, Super Soccer was consumed by Abelson Info at the time. And yeah, that's how it came to pass. So I've been working in the same role, but actually haven't been working for Abelson. Only been working for Abelson since 2017, but essentially, 20 years.
Okay, yeah. So 20 years of learning about all these different markets, specifically like goal scorers, and then more recently, obviously expanded into things like cards, as I understand, assists, shots on targets, fouls, that kind of thing. We see more and more of those these days, don't we? We see an explosion of that. But you've been there from, like, say, doing the regional. I didn't realize the Super Soccer you could do that, but that makes a lot of sense. The regional bookmaker stuff, and learn the fundamentals, and then obviously been part of the growth in some of these markets. So is the goal scorer market these days, is that the most popular one that you still do? Because, obviously people regularly do bet on both anytime first, last goal scorer now as well.
Yeah, I think anytime goal scorer is the king. That's the biggest of the player markets for sure.
Yeah.
But that's not to say that things haven't changed dramatically since we've added, or since the industry's sort of adopted more statistical based markets such as shots. Shots have really grown in fashion and a very big business now. Shots on targets. So yeah, anytime goal scorer, 2+, 3+ are really popular markets. And then your shots on target, assists, and player cards.
Yeah, and we see more of those cropping up. I see on my social media feed a lot of people betting on these or putting up bets upon them or tips upon them. So certainly have grown in demand. And so you obviously team up with a variety of bookmakers, operators. Are you allowed to discuss who you work with and who takes what?
Yeah, I mean, there's a list of operators on our website, but we count Flutter, so Sky Bet, Paddy Power, Betfair, plus all of their other global brands. Entain, so that's bwin, Ladbrokes, Coral, Sporting Bet, plus all of their global brands. Evoke, William Hill and 888. Playtech, which includes the absolutely giant Mexican bookmaker Caliente. And then Betson, Betway, Kaizen, which is Betano and Stuykeman. Hong Kong Jockey Club, Intralot for the Dutch Lottery. I'm not sure that's an exhaustive list, but yes, that's some of the main ones.
As well, there's not too many more beyond that. There's some really big names within that. So, you mentioned some of those UK firms, but obviously international firms. So you have a widespread reach, don't you?
Yes.
And so when you team up with an operator, what's the advantage of obviously using your own service? I guess it goes down to all the data and the information that you can provide for all the skills that you've developed versus them doing that in-house. I assume there's many more advantages from working with you than building up their own operation internally.
Yeah, well, if you think we cover 150 plus competitions, so we offer goal scorers from the Austrian Bundesliga to the Australian A-League, from Japanese league to the Ecuadorian Premier League, and then all the ones in between. That works out at over 17,000 matches per season, which we cover with at least goal scorer coverage. And for bigger competitions, so Premier League or the top leagues in Europe, MLS, Brazil, Serie A, we'll also add the stats markets. And so we're offering 56 different player markets per player per match, all with as live settlement and pre-match voids to ensure that the customer funds are quickly recycled. So to try and take that on and do it in-house, applying the same standards and the attention to detail that we sort of pride ourselves on is a gargantuan task. And because of the nature of the information gathering process, it's one that requires a fair bit of manual attention. I've got 15 guys that just work on football player markets, nothing else. They haven't got any other distractions. They just work on producing odds for these players in football matches. Firms aren't really interested in adding compilers or even traders anymore. They really want to streamline their stuff and automate whatever they can.
Yeah.
Our business works because we have multiple operators taking the product, but to employ 15 people just to do what we produce wouldn't make sense for a single operator, despite the margins achievable on these products. I think Bet365 are probably the only ones that remain of the top tier bookmakers that keep all of this in-house. they generally prefer to keep things in-house, and they're fairly unique in the industry for taking that approach. But even they've been adding products on more recently, the likes of Micro Markets and Simple Bet, or the golf product through IMG and Mustard. Although DraftKings have bought both of those businesses, so they have to find somewhere else to source that from.
And so how closely do the books stick to your pricing? I see from your website you offer leeway, you offer margins and raw odds. But do they take their own approach to it, sometimes challenge what you produce? How does that relationship work?
So it really does depend on the operator and their approach and or the back-end technology or capabilities they have. So some operators will like to tweak and individualise pricing for, say, the Premier League, but then we'll let our prices flow through with margin for, say, the Chinese Super League. So pick and choose depending on competition. Others, so Sky Bet, certainly for the top competitions, they have a really neat internal platform that allows all player and match fees to sort of arrive in this centralised dashboard, and then they can have full control over the players they decide to tweak or even show to the user. But others will sort of take a further approach in that they won't use our market ready or marginated prices. They'll use our raw prices and apply their own margin distribution to them. Others will take it even a step further and use the player expectancies in the feed. So each player has his own expectancy for that metric, and then they can run that through their own algorithms and produce their own markets, prices, all driven off our seed. And we also provide the player share figure. So what percentage of that team's expected total in whatever metric is that player expected to take. And
when it comes to boosted odds, is that something that you help with, or is that something the operator kind of oversees themselves?
No, that's very much an operator-led thing. They decide that. A lot of that will be done in conjunction with their marketing teams as well.
Great. All right. So that's obviously the markets you offer and how it works and why bookmakers will team up with a company like yourselves. But we'll get into now some of the markets and maybe some of the data first, because that must be the key point, right? You have to keep on top of the data, which must be a challenging operation to oversee. And given the huge number of markets you're talking about there, that wide range of leagues and games that take place, how are you managing that collection of data and making sure that it's as accurate and as up to date as possible?
As I alluded to, we've got 15 guys who split up competitions between them, and so essentially become experts within those competitions. Within that means they will end up with extensive libraries of local news sources that help with the information gathering phase. And because we've built our own player databases, we are responsible for updating the stats of each player post-match. You could argue this could be automated, but I like to continue to do it manually because it really allows the compiler to properly review what's happened, who played where, why was the overround short, was there a surprising change, who's got suspended for the next match, that kind of thing. It really helps by doing that manually. If you automate all that, you almost make it a little bit easy to sort of cheat a little bit with it. So by having that manual process, we really helps to sort of combine the compiler to the league and understanding the nuances within it.
Yeah.
That said, updating transfers during the windows could be really frantic, especially somewhere like Tally and Serie B, where there's thousands of loans. And we do use external sites. So the wonderful Transfermarkt, we use a lot for transfers, but also FBref, who scored, who both use Optadata, Soccerway, and then we use paid sites, Y-Scout, Soccer Association. A combination of all of those to provide statistical data and bits and pieces. But our key partners that we have commercial relationships with to help us with the products are Opta and Genius Sports. And they allow us to provide the fast settlement feeds that push the product.
That's great. So as you say, you have 15 guys who get paid to watch football all day and collect data and research about football, I guess.
Pretty much. I mean,
you must get a lot of CVs through the post.
Yeah, it doesn't take a lot of selling. I've never actually advertised for a role. It's all sort of come to me. I think it would be a hell of a lot to go through if I did advertise for a role. It's a really nice job.
Yeah, I imagine so. And so obviously those individuals become very specialised in their specific league. So, and understand, if there's a lot of loans in Italia Serie B where the information, the data, the best data is to kind of form all the informed information about that. So that's obviously established markets, but I'm curious, as we've seen, you're integrating and we see the improvement in the increased usage of like tackles, shots, that kind of data. When you bring in those new markets, or when a bookmaker says to you, oh, we really want to get this, we want to really offer betting on this type of micro in-game type of, whether it be tackles, shots, all those extra markets. How do you get into starting on that? Where do you begin from scratch? That must take quite an amount of time and thought process that goes into building that information.
And I think it's a good point. There's a definite distinction between pricing up goal scorers and then pricing up statistical based markets. Goal scorers, the patterns are fairly easy to discern, right? So as someone you can analyze a player's goal scoring output fairly simply. But if you want to analyze his fouls won or tackles or even shots versus shots on target, then you really need to do that with scale. You need to use some sort of advanced modeling or some sort of modeling to help you power through the data. And that's where our partners, 21st Group, actually come in. They are a data analytics firm, and they essentially crunch the data to provide expectancies for a lot of our stats-based markets. And then we polish that output into something that the customer can very much use on the front end.
That'd be something similar around, like you obviously mentioned the transfer window there, but let's say after the August transfer window, especially in some of these leagues where there's a lot of loans, there's a lot of flux. Is that where you need to lean on some of the modeling side of it to try and build up accurate pricing?
It is to an extent, because baselines and benchmarks are quite important when you're unsure. So if you've got a big enough data set, and it's important to consider that data set within the sort of league it's within. So there'll be very different data in the French second division to the Dutch Eredivisie. So as long as you're sort of comparing like for like, then producing benchmarks is important for players that you don't have an awful lot of confidence in terms of the data. And essentially that's how we start to price players that are maybe new to the system or new to football, even, youth players.
So let's apply this to the goal scorer market then. You might have the start of the season where you have to rely on some of those benchmarks. How then does that develop? Is versus the model, the trader, are they given much leeway? It sounds like they are, to kind of take positions and to adjust based on what they're seeing and their own understanding of the leagues.
So important thing to understand is that we don't see bet flow. So we don't see the bets coming in from the customers that use our service, right? So
right.
We are slightly blind to liability positions, I guess. But that said, we have extensive communication feedback loops with all of our clients. And if someone's of particular interest, and actually there's about 3 players for Barcelona tonight that have all got artificially short player card prices, because there's a consensus that they may well take a 5th yellow to be booked and miss the Valladolid game and be available for the Real Madrid game, for example. And that particular nuance is really difficult to pick up, that particular one, because the actual theory sounds good, but in practice it's not always, unless it's in Brazil. This doesn't necessarily take place in Europe. But to see that beforehand is not easy, right? So the prices go up, and then we've had a little bit of feedback to say, look, we want to be a lot shorter in the market. They've been a bit popular. And then you end up with like really quite artificial prices for sort of the top end of the market there. So that's an example of how the feedback would work. As compilers, we don't really take positions. We want to order a broadly fair product. Obviously, we work within parameters. So we don't like being in a position where we've got artificially short prices that are going to unbalance the book, because we like to work to a framework of these metrics should be priced to 100% of the expected metric total, if that makes sense. So, we are working within that framework, and then have to make adjustments and concessions around other players for ones that are taking out more than their fair share.
And how does that adjust when it goes in play? Because I assume you're still doing the pricing in play goal scorers, maybe some of the in play statistics. How does that differ in play? Have you got some of these guys watching some of these games and adjusting as the games unfold?
Yeah, so we've got eyes on as many games as we can watch. So for in-play games, the trader will have 2, 3 maybe games where they will cover in play, and we'll have the feeds, and obviously we'll have a fast data scout feed as well. So obviously we know exactly what's happening. So, and then the algorithm will sort of calculate prices. The most important phase, especially from the bettor's point of view, and from the operator's point of view, is when the team news comes out, right? So the actual lineups.
Yeah.
That 45 minutes to an hour is crucial to, are we right here or are we way wrong? And do we need to make adjustments? And we have an automated approach to that for the in-play model. So the pre-match player shares, so the pre-match percentages flow through to the in-play side of things. And once the lineups are announced and Opta pass them through to us, we automatically scale the total percentage for that starting 10. Maybe it's in at 110%. Then that extra 10% will be proportionally taken from all the players in the team. So we start the in-play match with 100% of the expected goals for that team total taken up. And then we start there. And then obviously we move through. Players can come on, and then those are constantly adjusting, those auto scalings constantly adjusting. But then, and there's a good example from last week, you see a player like Harry Maguire comes on.
I was going to mention him. He was on my list. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a good example, right? And obviously he scored. So he comes on, he's a centre back, normally in for like 3% maybe. Or he put him up front. Suddenly, in play, you need to be aware that the centre half's up front now. You make concessions and, he's suddenly in for 18% of the goals. And that's where it's difficult to automate that. You have to have people overseeing stuff, and we do.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, because there's another one that sprung out in my mind where I think it was in a Europa League game under Ten Hag where Mazraoui, who is the centre-back, was playing the 10 position. And I think he was 16s, 20 to 1. And then obviously he started the game maybe about 4s as people cottoned on. And those kind of situations where, it's not in play, but it's the lineup, and you don't realise that unless, you're on top of the interview the manager might do prior to the game, and you think, oh, he's going to be centre back. And then you watch the lineup and he's playing up front or he's playing left wing as left back. I understand in the Harry Maguire situation, everyone's watching that game. It's Europa League, but Italian Serie B, when you've got 10 games going on, that must be more of a challenge.
No, I'm not going to pretend that we cover Italian Serie B in play. We would if we were asked to cover it, but as of right now, we don't cover it in play. But there's no doubt there's bits of value floating around because we aren't necessarily snapping everything to 100% for games that we aren't picking up in play. So yeah, Italian Serie B, for example, Bulgarian, Prva Liga, all of those kind of leagues in that pre-match phase. So from the time the lineups are announced to the kickoff, there's going to be bits of value. It's the difficult thing is being able to cater and find it fast enough, right?
Yeah.
And then as soon as the bets start coming in, it will get snipped up.
You're not seeing the volume of money being traded, so you don't know if an operator has seen a lot of money traded in for one particular player. And maybe their odds are moving, but you need to have that feedback loop there, which obviously will allow you to go, okay, yeah, they've seen too much for this guy. Why is that?
So it's exactly that. Well, part of the reason for the post-match review is that we can see, oh, hold on. Oh, he played there. That was unexpected. Why was that? And do we need to think that he's going to play there again? But also, we encourage all the operators. It's not a managed trading service, so all the operators will manage their own trading, and we'll have automated processes in place to cut players that are suddenly seen a slurry of money when it was unexpected. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And then you've referenced obviously team news being critical, and that's generally 60 minutes. But I've noticed more recently, I've seen lineups coming out 65, 70 minutes before a game. Did you get that straight away? Have you got facilities? Because imagine if you're a bit late on that and someone has got it earlier than you, that's a vulnerability. Do you have, or make sure that you get it as soon as it's out from the first source? Is that Opta, or is there some other system or way that lineup news can come out?
Yeah, it's either Opta or Genius, depending on the rights holder. But we get it as soon as they process it, if that makes sense. So you may see the information out earlier on Twitter or something like FlashScore, which is using a slightly different approach to collating information. But the actual formation may not be totally correct using those sources. So we are as fast as Opta. That's not to say that's prior. That's before the rest of the world knows, because the club announces the lineup on Twitter, then essentially someone Opta's got to ingest that as well. There's not like an automatic route to Opta that make them faster than social media. Do you know what I mean? So There's still a small gap in there, but you've got to be fast, and you've got to have an inkling before, I think, for a particular player in a particular match, or I think the task's slightly too big to suddenly go, hold on, how many players, how many matches am I looking at? What are all the lineups? Compare them. It's too late now.
Well, I guess for those main leagues, you'll be able to see it. Often you tend to game, and you can see during the warm up. Like sometimes, if you get to a game early enough, or you have insight into or an inside line into a club, especially a smaller club, you get a sense of who's playing, who isn't, quicker than a lineup may well come out.
Yeah,
but there's no way of really knowing that, is there? Unless you have somebody
not reliably. No.
Exactly.
We'll pick up the odd bit, and the Mazraoui thing, as you mentioned, that was set around our Slack group pretty fast.
Yeah.
Prior to the kickoff.
I'm sure.
What's going on?
Penalty takers must be the other one as well, right? Because I can think of a few examples again, like when Mo Salah's not playing, and then it's like who's on penalties for Liverpool. That must be another one that can throw you at times when, especially if a game's happened and maybe someone's missed a penalty, and like who's the next one? Is the same guy going to take it? They must be quite interesting challenges to work out.
They are, and the approach we kind of take is, well, if we don't know, then the chances are the majority of the punters don't know either.
Yeah.
And so, it's not too bad. But I think there was an example, the mighty Villa the other week, Asensio missed 2 penalties.
Yes. Yeah, I remember, yeah.
And then obviously last night he wasn't on the pitch, but Rashford stepped up and scored. So now, if Watkins isn't playing, we'd imagine if Rashford's playing and Watkins isn't, for example, then we'd imagine Rashford will be on penalties. But the Villa have not been particularly successful with penalties this season. Tielemans has missed 1. Asensio's missed 2. So, it is a little bit up in the air. I think sometimes the teams go out and they don't even know who's going to take the penalty.
Yeah. When they have an argument on the field, that's always quite amusing, when it's like, who wants to take the penalty.
Oh, yeah.
Generally happens at Chelsea.
Lots of things happen at Chelsea.
Yeah, that's right.
This podcast is sponsored by the Matchbook Betting Exchange. When it comes to betting exchanges, Matchbook has been my personal go-to for some time now. Using horse racing as an example, they've offered the best prices on the most runners this year, which can make a big difference to your bottom line. Plus, with an industry-leading score of 4.2 on Trustpilot, you're in safe hands. Download the Matchbook Betting Exchange app or go to matchbook.com today. And if you enter the code SBC150, that's SBC150 on sign up, you can get commission-free for your first 150 days, which can give you even more value. If you need to place a larger or more bespoke bet, or are indeed a corporate or operator client, their brokerage service is excellent and available 365 days a year. For more details, email the team at brokerage@matchbook.com. Matchbook Betting Exchange is for bettors who know better.
Is there like a type of goal scorer, like a profile that are, like, let's say like a Haaland, Kane, Mbappe, they're all heavily backed by rec money. Is there a riskier profile for goal scorers that you're kind of concerned about from that perspective?
This is an interesting one. So, the like Haaland, Kane, Mbappe, obviously hugely popular recreational bets. And if they don't score, or if they don't have a shot on target, for example, which is becoming even more important, then invariably going to be a decent week for the bookmaker. And I'd add Messi into that for Inter Miami, Lewandowski as well still. But also tipster selections are popular and they snowball. So I think Vaclav Cerny was a popular selection last week in Europa League for 3+ shots. And I think people sort of latched onto that, and there was a flurry of money for him from what I gather. But in terms of profiles, I think the compilation side becomes quite tricky when you've got a player that is so far ahead of his team in terms of his output versus the rest of the team that it kind of skews the contribution.
Yeah.
I've got a great example here of a player who's now playing in Mexico, but was playing in Holland at the time and then went to Celtic. So Georgios Giacomakis. So he won the Golden Boot in the Dutch league in 2021, I think. But he played for Venlo at the time. Now, Venlo were relegated that season, and he won the Golden Boot. So he scored 26 goals in 30 games for Venlo. But Venlo only scored 43 in total. So he had 60% of their goals.
Wow.
If you put him in for 60% of the goals, then the other 9 players have to split the 40% between them. And that means you can get some huge prizes if and when he doesn't play, or even when he is playing, to be honest. So that requires careful sort of distribution there. It's an outlier. So you have to approach things slightly different with players with like that, or even Haaland. Haaland for Norway is a good example. And then this season, another example, not quite at the Giacomakis level, but we got Sam Stein for FC Twente. He scored 23 and 28 playing from midfield. So that's 42% of their total.
Wow.
He's also going to win the Golden Boot there. But when these players don't play, and this is why you need to follow it carefully and know, you've got to split that takeout, their takeout amongst the others. And in the example of Sam Stein, Mitchell Vlap or Arno Verschuren, who are likely to play instead of him, they're just not going to be worth 40% of the market, you know? So then you've got to distribute it more evenly across the rest of the players. I mean, some of that is taken into account because you'd imagine the team goal expectancy is slightly reduced, but not fully taken into account. So you need to be careful with how you distribute the shares of goals with players that are so valuable when they're missing.
So there's a bit of a tip there for anyone listening. Look out for those players because there's potentially some value to be found there. And that kind of segues nicely onto, I want to ask you a question about one where you got it wrong. I'll ask you one where you got it right in a minute. But was there a player or where it went very badly wrong? And is there perhaps the reasoning behind what actually took place on that?
Oh, this is an absolute classic one. And we're going to go back a little bit here. This is going back to 2012, September 2012. And I was still Super Soccer at the time, and we were basically compiling goal scorer prices off the tops of our heads. So you go, oh, he's a striker, he's scored this, this, and this. They're this price against this team. He's 7-2. That's how it was back in the day. And we decided to employ, there was myself and a colleague, but there wasn't many people in the business, right? So we decided to employ the son of this senior colleague of mine. It wasn't my decision, but we gave him a chance. And one of his earlier tasks in his role was to price up the Shakhtar Donetsk v FC Nordsjælland Champions League game. As I say, this was well before we used any sort of algos. So his job was to produce a first goal scorer price, and then the anytime, the 2+, 3+ would all be read off a chart, as we used to do it. But I think he was a little lazy, and he decided that given Henrik Mkhitaryan's position, so he's like a centre mid, attacking midfielder, he chipped him in, and I can't remember exactly what the price was, but it was double figures for first goal. And Shakhtar Donetsk were at home, they're a big favourite against the Danish team. Something like 14, 16-1 first goal, right? Way out. This guy's 2+ was at 66+. His hat-trick was sort of topping the chart out, 100+. And Mkhitaryan that season scored 25 in 29 league games. I was in Manchester at the time, and I got Stan James ringing me up because they were one of our earlier clients, and they were getting absolutely filled in. What's this? What do you know about this lad? What do you know about this? I thought, I know. I already knew he was a good player, right? So I don't know what's going on here. I said, we're getting filled in with 2+. They're taking anything. We've cut it 4 times. They're still taking oh man. So I had a look at it. His price is completely wrong. And every time they were moving it, an update from our end would then push it back out. So it was just sort of adding to the disaster. Anyway, that was the night before the match, right? So then the match was the day after, and we sort of changed the price and whatever, but the damage had kind of been done. He scored twice, both goals. There was a 2-0 win.
Oh, wow.
We sacked the lad in the end.
I can imagine. Yeah. I mean, Stan James is no more. I don't know if that's what led to the...
Yeah, it's a good story.
Yeah, well, that Mkhitaryan, that would have been before he got his move to United, before he was perhaps well known.
Oh, it was before he was at Dortmund, yeah.
Yeah, that's right, Dortmund. Right, okay. That's a good story. And then I picked this up off Twitter. I think this was from last year, but of a success story. You actually picked out in a game for the Greece national team where they failed to pick 4 players thinking they were suspended, but they actually weren't. Do you want to relay the story?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Yeah, so we followed the suspensions closely, especially for when you've got 2 international games in a week, so 2 European Championship qualifiers or whatever in a week. When the national team managers select the squads, there's a chance that they could select a player that they know is banned for the first match, wanting him to be in the squad available for the second match, right? And vice versa, that they could have a player who's on a tightrope, gets a booking and then misses the second match. And look, there's no secret to this. UEFA publish the updated booking lists after each round, right? So it's not difficult to find out who should be suspended or even who's on the tightrope going into a match. And because of that relationship with Kaizen, so we were supplying Stoichiman, who got a huge operation in Greece, we'd had a discussion internally and said, these guys are suspended. So we'd left them out of the betting. And then we were getting asked, well, you haven't added these guys. I said, no, they're suspended. They're clearly suspended. It's even on UEFA. They're definitely suspended. They get deselected from the national team squad because Gus Poyet thinks, well, I'm sure it wasn't his fault, but Gus Poyet thinks that they're suspended. And we were absolutely adamant that these guys were not suspended. So yeah, got the one. They were available, right? And so we'd included them. And it turned out that we were right. And it came out in the Greek press after the match that the Greek FA had made this huge blunder and had kept players out because they thought they were suspended when they weren't, and we'd included them because we knew they weren't suspended. Yeah, I got the story slightly wrong there. And then after that, I had a flurry of contact with Greek press to do interviews about how we knew and the Greek FA didn't.
Yeah. They still won the game, though. They still won 5-0, didn't they? I don't know who they were playing. It was probably
a 5-0, yeah. One of the players that they thought was suspended but wasn't was Tsimikas from Liverpool. So
Greeks bearing gifts. There you go.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But I was going to ask, in terms of player markets, do you think, or I don't know what your experience is in doing like match lines or handicaps, would you say comparatively if one's easier than another, if goal scorers versus money lines or handicap team lines?
In terms of profitability for a punter, or
probably from your perspective in terms of pricing?
Now I'd find it easier to come up with a player share for a goal scorer because that's kind of what we do all day, every day. But back in the day, we used to tissue prices for, I remember at Super Soccer, we used to do all the Australian football, the summer coupons in Australia.
Yeah.
So if you remember, in the summer, there was nothing on. So Ladbrokes, Corals, Hills, Tote, they used to produce this Australian football coupon. It used to have all this sort of semi-professional football in Australia. Actually, those coupons were the same prices pretty much because we produced them at Super Soccer. And actually, there were 3 of us that produced the pricing. So each one of us would do a tissue for these Australian matches and then get all the tissues in. And then we kind of, if we're in consensus, that'd be the price. We sort of price up the favourite, you see. And then if we weren't in consensus, we'd just kind of get down the middle. And this went on for years. We were producing these coupons for these firms for years, doing it that way. So back in the day, yeah, nothing better than using the Racing Football Outlook to work out the Australian form because that's where it was all published, and then just pricing it up so the bookmakers, I'm sure they made enough margin on it at the time to generally encourage DACAs, long lists. So do I find it easier? I used to enjoy doing tissues and stuff like that, but I'm probably not mathematically gifted or technical enough to really embrace the nuances in player rate, in sort of team ratings and rankings. And I don't really do that myself now. I'm more of a holistic view. Oh, that looks wrong. And I think from the punter point of view,
yeah, from the punter point of view, that'd be interesting. Yeah,
there's less margin in the money lines, but there's a lot more data and accuracy that will be there. The opportunity to find a rick, or not even a rick, just a price that is too big in a goal scorer market is far more likely. Even though the margins in those products are far greater. The one that I always say to people, thing to look out for is players playing out of position.
Yeah.
If you've got your left back, it's playing left wing. In the case of Mazraoui or even Matty Cash for Villa this season, sometimes played higher up. Those are the ones you want to really look at because they've been priced up in the wrong position. So if you've got the left back priced up as a left back and he's in at 3.5% or something like that, but he's actually playing as a left forward, there's almost a 10, 12% differential there that you've got. So that's going to overcome all of your margin negative, and you're going to be having a nice positive EV bet. And those are the ones you really need to look out for. It's harder though, because there's so many players, there's so many, you need to know a lot and you need to be fast. I think from a punter point of view, those are the nice juicy ones if you want a big prize, but the sort of money lines are your bread and butter. But again, you start playing money lines in leagues that aren't necessarily very big, you're going to get closed down pretty fast, right? So it's a tough gun.
And so from the perspective of a bettor that, is looking to win, how are punters that bet on, for example, Entain or first goal scorer markets viewed, if you take a sharp price and it's not immediately obvious, it's not like a Mazraoui or it's not a left back playing left wing where the trader might filter those kind of players and who's taking those bets, lumpy bets. How are punters that you bet on these markets generally viewed? Is their action quite welcome, or is there? It just seems from the outside looking in, it's probably a little bit more room to bet on some of these markets.
Yeah, and again, I would stress that this is very dependent on the competition. So if you think from a bookmaker's point of view, they'll have a tiering system for competitions, and a lot of the leagues we cover will be within the top couple of tiers of those hierarchies. But the further down you get, so for example, the Dutch second division, then it will stick out a bit more, and the overall handle or revenue turnover on those markets will be significantly lower, unless of course it's a Dutch operator, and therefore your bets and the associated negative EV or losses associated with those markets will be more obvious, and so you're more likely to get picked up with those. Whereas, yeah, if you think you've got a small edge on a Premier League anytime, then I think you're going to have a pretty large rope to do what you want with it, to be honest, as it should be, really.
Yeah, and obviously the variance might be there, especially if you're taking first goal scorer, because you might be betting at 6-1, 7-1, even on strikers or attacking midfielders. So you have that to bear in mind as well. It's not always the most straightforward strategy to follow, because it can be quite easily scuppered by chance.
Absolutely, variance is such an important thing. And there's a key point on variance, that if you find a player, and believe me, there are plenty out there, not necessarily ones that we've done, but other operators. If you find a player that is consistently priced wrong or priced in the wrong position, then you need to follow that for as long as you can until it's changed. And obviously, the variance comes into that, right? So you could have a run of 3 matches of this player in the wrong position, and he may not score. The 4th match, they've moved him, but he scores, and you're out of it. You're not betting at those prices, and you don't know how long you've got. And I guess that's the whole thing with edges, right? You just don't know how long you've got.
Yeah, and it's not always because they score that the market then reacts and realizes, oh, we had this one wrong.
No.
It could be somebody goes, oh, this guy, they see the same data that maybe you see, and then adjust their prices prior to a bet actually ever winning. So yeah, it can be a challenging one from that perspective, I'm sure. And so in terms of some of the other markets, we've focused a lot on goal scorers, understandably, but you mentioned shots is quite popular. Are there any other markets that you think that will become more popular, or where bettors might want to examine and take a look at?
Definitely. I mean, if you talk in terms of popularity over the last couple of years, then shots are absolutely up there. Ones we've started offering more recently, which are pretty niche, and I don't necessarily know how much traction they'll get, but we offer sort of goalkeeper saves, but also fouls committed and fouls won, which can be quite interesting markets. But things that have, perhaps looking at it the other way, things that have become less popular. First goal scorer markets have become less popular. They were bigger than any time, but now they are smaller than player assists.
Why is that, do you think?
I think partly because the variance approach you mentioned. So if you think about the whole evolution of these player markets, and fortunately for Abelson, has come about because of the absolute explosion of Bet Builder, right? So these markets are perfect to put into Bet Builders because a lot of them aren't correlated. I mean, some of them are, but some like player fouls or player cards and goal scorers aren't really
correlated. We get you.
Correlated. Oh my God. And so adding those two almost multiplies the price of the bet.
Yeah.
Whereas if you've got something like tennis and you've got aces won versus games won, they're really highly correlated. So the actual price increase is really small. So having player markets where you can have lots of anti-correlated markets together can really boost the price really, really quite high, right? With just a few selections. So you don't need to have a first goal scorer 8-1. You can have any time goal scorer at 3-1, and then put that with a player card, and you've still got your 16-1 shot. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense.
You're already building a big price bet. You don't need to take the risk that your bet's down in the first 10 minutes or the first half of the match because the player hasn't scored the first goal. People want their bets to last longer. And so, any time are really popular because of that. And I think that's why. I also think the latest sort of promotions that bookmakers are running where they'll allow the sub to take over the bet. So for example, 365, I know Paddy Power did it first. I think Hills do it too. They sort of, if your player comes off, is subbed off, then the player who comes on assumes the bet and the bet can carry on. I think those are fantastic for the punter, for the recreational punter, because it means that the bet continues to run for the whole game. You haven't got to worry about player being subbed off. And of course, one of the big changes in the last couple of years has been the introduction of these 5 subs. And these 5 subs have really not done the punter any favours, because a lot of their bets were getting downed. Half the team was being changed, right? And their bets were over well before they would have been with just 3 subs. So these kind of concessions back in are really interesting.
Yeah, definitely with the goal scorer, because I think the goal scorer mark substitutions are so frustrating, because invariably it's a substitute in attacking positions. You don't really see a centre back getting subbed off. Maybe a holding midfielder will stay on. So and you're not really backing those guys unless it's Van Dijk or something like that from a corner. So that can be very, very frustrating. That's really interesting. I've loved this conversation. Thank you so much. It's been really, really insightful for myself and my own bet. We haven't really talked about, like, say, the bet builder and the same game parlay kind of approach. Obviously, there's value there to be found. If you find a market or players, you can use that to extract more value potentially.
You absolutely can, yeah. And if we've got time, I'll just tell you about what people were doing in Brazil Serie A with these.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
So in Brazil, they have a suspension system which, for the league, in the Brazil Serie A and Serie B, if you pick up 3 yellows, you're banned for the next match, right? In Brazil, there's a lot of inter-club loans. So a lot of loans in the division. So Vasco may have loaned a player from Corinthians. And it's the same in the Premier League. You cannot play against your parent club. So any players that are on a tightrope, the tightrope would be 2 cards, 5 cards, 8 cards, would almost, and the one a couple of seasons ago, it was a guarantee that they would pick up a booking in the match, so that they would miss suspended the game they couldn't play against their parents. So they would pick up a card in the match prior, so that they would be suspended versus their parent club, and then clear of suspension for the next run. Right? We'd picked up on this nuance, and we'd been factoring these in. But how short do you go? Do you even offer the prices? And as the season went on, it was like 100% hit rate with these players getting booked.
Wow!
And so the player cards prices were like, he'd be in for 1 to 5, he'd be in for 1 to 7. Honestly, crazy. You even got a situation where the player was on the bench, got booked from the bench.
He's so desperate to get a card. I'm thinking of, is it Lucas Vasquez, who plays for West Ham, who was in trouble for getting booked and maybe betting on it? He's Brazilian, so maybe there's a culture there.
It's it wasn't Vasquez. It was
what's his name?
What's his face? The Brazilian kid.
Oh yeah, I know. Vasquez plays for Real Madrid. Sorry, there's another guy. Yeah, well, he'll come to mind after the podcast. Yeah,
that was good because Betway picked that up, and obviously they're a client of ours, and it was very obvious that there was an issue because there was a concentration of bets in his hometown, and his hometown was this tiny village in Brazil. So
there you go. Yeah,
that's still ongoing, I think. So we don't want to get too involved with that particular. Lucas Paqueta was the player.
Paqueta, yeah, I just googled it myself. Yeah, that's the one. We got the right first name.
But yeah, that was a particularly interesting scenario, I think. There.
Yeah, definitely. The bookings one's quite intriguing because you can just see this potential value there from the nuance of understanding the specifics of those bookings markets or the loan market or whatever the specific culture is or the dynamic there in those markets. So that's really interesting. So from yourself, Jeev, thank you so much. What's on the horizon at Abelson? Do you want to outline what it is you're working on at the moment or what you're looking to do moving forward?
Yeah, I'll mention the one thing that is coming very soon. In fact, I'm off to Florida next month for an SBC conference in Fort Lauderdale, and we're going to be unveiling our soccer or football, as we should call it, bet builder that we've had developed by a company called Orbital Bet. We've got a development team in Poland that we're very close to, and that's been ongoing for the start of the year. And it's a player first approach in terms of the front end UX and UI is very much player first. So all the players and all the different markets, as we noted, Bet365 have recently started to do as well. But yeah, we think that's got some scope, and obviously with using our Abelson's player feeds, it could be. We hope that's a very powerful product and something that operators will want to sort of take either as an iframe or as an API feed, or even we're happy to sell the code as well for these products. So that's the big one.
Yeah, well, that sounds fascinating. So that's getting launched next month in Florida, right? So look out for that. And Before we wrap up, actually, a friend of the show, who we both know, Tom Brownlee, I believe is a mutual acquaintance.
He is. He lives down the road from me.
Yeah, he mentioned to me, he wanted to know, is Bromsgrove, why is it the epicenter for sharp modelling on player bets? And I was going to ask, we've got Dragon Bet for Welsh bettors. Could we have a Brom bet or a Brommy bet for people from Bromsgrove?
Well, if Tom's willing to put up the startup money to get the licence in place, then I'm willing to join him.
There you go, Tom. There's your offer. No, that's fun. Well, thank you ever so much for coming on, sharing your time and your insight. It's been really valuable, really interesting. I think people listening to this are probably going to go and have a look at some of the markets that are out there that maybe they haven't considered. And how can people get in touch if they want to contact you or learn more about Abelson?
Well, I'm still on Twitter, but I don't use it anymore, given the negative connotations it seems to have picked up. Probably the best way is LinkedIn now, or via my contact page on our website, abelsonsports.com. But yeah, I'm sure that's the best way.
Okay, great. Well, I'll slide all that into the show notes so people can find the links, find you, find Abelson, and learn more about what it is you do. So thank you ever so much, Jeev. Really appreciate you spending the time, sharing your insight, and thank you very much.
No, thanks, Pete. Thanks very much for having me.